Hello, thanks for clicking play. So, let's get to it. So right now we're going to be talking about heart disease. We're going to be talking about some of the underlying reasons for the vast majority of the reason why we have heart disease in a Western diet. First, we're going to talk a little bit about why exactly fad diets have, or we're going to talk about why fad diets have, Atkins diet has showed positive results, and why high carbohydrate diets also have high, some instances of positive results as well. We're always pointing fingers at the other guy, saying that you're the issue and you're the issue, just fighting over these macronutrients. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about polyphenols and the benefits of antioxidant agents in the system. So let's get to it. First thing that we need to do is understand what exactly is heart disease. Well, heart disease is the clogging of the artery. And this can happen in your veins and your capillaries, everywhere in your system, all over your circulatory system. But it's the most fundamentally damaging to your whole body when it hits your heart. So, you have your heart, right, or your heart artery, and this is a nice clean hole, right? Well, what happens is that you get a buildup of what we call plaque, and that plaque is made up of majority of cholesterol and fatty acids. And this is one of the reasons why our modern diet, dietary science says, all right, you have your artery, and then you have a clot that's made up of majority of cholesterol and fatty acids. So obviously, if you reduce your cholesterol and fatty acids, then you reduce the clot. But another reason is, for what we typically think of what to eat, is that when we consume a diet that's high in fat and high in cholesterol, around 4 hours afterwards, we have a very high levels of these exact same nutrients. It progresses after the consumption of these ingredients, but it peaks around 4 hours. So if we consume high-fat, high-sugar foods, high-fat, high cholesterol foods, and the majority of a clot or a plaque is made up of high fat and high cholesterol, well, it's pretty inherent that that's the issue, right? I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Now, it also makes some sense here, and what is also being typically said throughout the dietary community is that LDL is bad. Now, what makes LDL bad? Decent amount of things, but what makes LDL bad and what really makes HDL good is that HDL doesn't necessarily oxidize as regularly as LDL. Oxidized LDL is what's most strongly associated with heart disease. This oxidized nature essentially damages the artery by interacting with the proteins in the membrane of the cells that make up the artery, and damaging it by stealing electrons from it. And this damage causes some inflammation. It causes white blood cells to come excrete different enzymes and cause inflammation, and this inflammation is often seen as a reason for why we need cholesterol and fats are actually a healing agent, and they come in this damaged, inflamed area and attempt to heal it. But what happens is when you have high levels of cholesterol and free fatty acids in the system, is that this healing process is over-exaggerated, and it clots a little bit, and you get a little bit of a clot, and then it builds up more and more and more until you have a really clogged artery or an artery that's completely cut off and therefore have a heart attack. So that is the majority of the reason why I didn't talk a lot about other components that are really fundamental to heart disease in this area, but this is the underlying cause. This is really one of the biggest reasons for why we have heart disease, remember. So this is why fats are attributable to heart disease. But what is the other factor? The sugar. Everyone points at the sugar. Why does everyone point out the sugar? Well, the major reason is that sugar does a process in the body called glycosylation. This is essentially the sticky nature of sugar. When sugar is being pumped through your body, it doesn't necessarily really change much of the structure. Just like, syrup, it sticks to anything that you put on it. It sticks to your wood. It sticks to this. It still sticks to your arteries. It still sticks to fats. It still sticks to cholesterol, and it also still oxidizes the cell membrane. So if you have this extremely sticky oxidized glucose running through your body, it sticks to the cell wall, and therefore causes inflammation and a response to damage, and therefore calls for cholesterol and fats to come to it, and therefore also help the exaggerated process in people with high cholesterol and high fat to come in and interact with it. So you accelerate the process, and therefore you get this clot more quickly. Now, what's also happens in people's, one thing we should talk about is with people with diabetes, they actually have an increase of 3 to 4 times the instances of heart disease. Now, most drugs only lower the risk of a heart attack by 1 in every 150 people. And they really don't, statin drugs, what's proven to reduce cholesterol, really don't do much to decrease mortality. So you only reduce the instances of heart disease by a little bit. Some would say a little bit, some may say a lot, but and you only reduce the instances of mortality really right around 0, particularly for women. Why is this? Why is someone who is insulin insensitive, like someone like a diabetic, how is that attributable to high levels of heart disease? Well, one thing that we talked about is people who are diabetic, who ingest sugar, they continue to have high levels of circulating glucose, and because they can't digest it properly or use it properly because they aren't insulin sensitive. So if you have high levels of circulating glucose and you have high levels of fats, then everything that we talked about is exaggerated. And that's why you have extremely high instances of heart disease in patients with diabetes. So really, and also we have to talk about that insulin tells the body to pick up, the cells in the body to pick up everything out of the circulatory system, not necessarily just glucose. It responds most attributed to glucose, but it also tells fat cells and things to pick up the fats in the system. So it helps you actually reduce the glucose in the circulatory system, and also helps you reduce the free fatty acids in the circulatory system. Now, someone who's insulin insensitive has a bunch of circulating insulin, but doesn't, or sometimes not in severe cases, or type 1 diabetics, and therefore they have these accelerated risks. You have circulating insulin, high levels of glucose, and high fat diet, or high fats in the bloodstream. It really is the perfect storm for heart disease. Now, this is one of the reasons, this could be used as an example. People who we have always been told fats are bad for you and sugar is bad, added sugars are bad for you. Why is this? Well, the reason is that you elevate the level of circulating glucose in your system, and you also elevate your level of circulating fats in the system. So you're increasing your risk. We could say that, oh, but I'm not diabetic. It doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter, but you're not going to escape the fact that you're still going to, at some point, increase your risk of heart disease, because you're going to increase the amount of times that glucose is in your system at high levels, and you're also going to increase the amount of times that you have high fat levels in your system. So what we really want to do in order to prevent heart disease is eat foods that have that are lower in fat necessarily, and also lower in saturated fat. One reason being that saturated fat is something that we consume very regularly, and though it is necessary in our system, consumed in overabundance, it actually can lead to insulin insensitivity. And this is one of the reasons why we need monosaturated fat in our system, is because it sort of helps the balance of the nature of the cells. It helps them become more insulin sensitive. If you have too much, that can still have the same result, but because the Western diet isn't high necessarily in monosaturated fats, we're deficient in them. That's why they're beneficial. It's because we're overusing our saturated fat stores, and we're overusing and we're underutilizing monosaturated fats. And the other way we can become more insulin sensitive, is the first one was avoiding high saturated fat foods to some degree, and also increases the risk of, or increasing the amount of monosaturated fat. The other way is that you can stop consuming so much friggin' sugar. When you have so much sugar in your system, what happens is, we talked a little bit about it, but you have high levels of circulating insulin, and this insulin tells cells to bring in glucose, bring in glucose, bring in glucose. Eventually, the cells get so filled with glucose that they don't want any more glucose anymore. So they stop becoming so sensitive to the insulin. They say, I don't want any more. And they start removing their receptors from their membrane, and they start reducing the interactions that the insulin's going to have with the system. And you're going to have insulin insensitivity if you consume too much glucose. If you have too many if you have too many insulin spikes from high glycemic foods, you're going to have too many, or you're going to have very little insulin sensitivity. You have to make the body want glucose in order to increase your insulin sensitivity. And then one way to do this, high intensity exercises. By utilizing high intensity exercise, you upregulate the body's ability to respond to insulin. Because when you're using up all the energy, the body's like, well, shit, I don't have any more energy. Put the friggin' receptors back up there. I need to respond to more insulin. You gotta tell the cells, the actual cells, to want insulin. And you do that by causing deprivations in glucose levels. This is one of the ways that a low carbohydrate diet does this. It actually increases insulin sensitivity by reducing carbohydrates. But then again, we also remember talking about that saturated fats can be attributable to, but it's less attributable than insulin from carbohydrates. Okay, so that basically sums it up. Remember we talked about oxidized nature and the interactions of the cells and the cell membrane and the buildup? You reduce the number of oxidative components by consuming antioxidants, polyphenols. This is one of the reasons why you can sort of have a mitigating effect. They don't have as big of an effect as reducing these macronutrients, but they can be attributed to the health benefits. And they sort of, you can optimize yourself by consuming low sugar foods or low glycemic foods and consuming things like fiber that help regulate your blood sugar levels, and also consuming low or moderate levels of fats and good levels of monosaturated fat and saturated fat, and also consuming these polyphenols, and obviously your vitamins and nutrients, because those can also lead to imbalances in the mitochondria and other parts of the cell that are needed and necessary for homeostasis and the body's ability to respond to insulin. Holy crap, we talked about a lot right there. I really hope that you got it, and this is what I believe is the most fundamental component of heart disease. This is the high sugar, high fat foods, in sedentary nature. If you're sedentary, sitting around and consuming these beverages, your body doesn't want any glucose. If you're running around, sprinting, doing high intensity exercises, lowering your and doing interval training, that's what's going to make your body want glucose. Not sitting around doing nothing. Your body doesn't want any glucose that way. So then you become insulin insensitive. Insulin sensitivity doesn't really work with fat, sort of per se, because fat is very insulinogenic, and it's relatively easy for your body to assimilate it into your body. Okay. I would talk about let's see here. I would talk about clotting, but that's a little bit of a different story. But I screw it. I'll talk a little bit about it if I have time. If you're bruised easily, what happens? You damage your cells, and you damage your veins, capillaries, and things. What happens? Fats come in, trying to repair that damage. What happens when you have damage? You have high levels of glucose and high levels of cholesterol. That results in buildup, and then you build up. So if you bruise easily, then you likely have higher instances of heart disease. So those are some of the things you should know. I mean, obviously platelets, coagulation, and fiber analyses. I can't really pronounce that very right. But those are the things that we are going to sort of talk about probably in a later video. But pretty much what you need to know is that don't override your body's natural system for mitigating heart disease. Don't oversaturate yourself with sugar. Don't oversaturate yourself with fat. And don't undersaturate yourself with nutrients. And don't oversaturate yourself with nutrients. Take a multivitamin. Take an omega-3. Then get your friggin' high-intensity exercise and eat your fruits and vegetables.